Hey everybody and welcome back. It's another episode of the Stevens Athletics Coaches Corner. This week we're talking cross country. I'm Drew Casey and joined by the men's and women's cross country head coach, as well as indoor and outdoor track and field. He is Lance Harden. Coach, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So it's been a start to the season, a couple of meets in for both the men's and the women's side. When you put it all together, how would you assess the start of your fall season in this now normal fall competition schedule?
It's been very strange for us, actually pretty abnormal. So our first meet that was scheduled at Vassar, we were not able to travel because of Hurricane Ida. So we missed that one. That's normally like a nice rust buster, people to get back into the spirit of competition and racing. It's a shorter distance race. So we missed that. We had our first meet instead at Lebanon Valley College. It was our first time going to that course. They're going to be hosting the MAC championships next year, so we felt like it was important to go see it. And we got to see a lot of teams in our conference too, which was great. It's a really nice course, really spectator friendly, a lot of loops, and fairly flat with a couple hills. So it was a good first test. The men jumped straight into the fire with the full 8K distance. We have a lot of first years and sophomores on our team that have never raced 8K cross country. So that's tough for your first race of the season to be 3K longer than you've ever raced in high school. And then on the women's side, it was nice. They got to open with a 5K, which is a familiar distance for them. So we thought it went pretty well. We had a race plan at the first meet where we had athletes working together in groups based on how they had looked in workouts prior to that. And we tried to hold them back a little bit to make sure that their first race experience went well and that they were able to practice even to negative splits in the race. And we had some people execute really well. And so we'll get into this later, but Liam Concannon on the men's side was able to maintain the pace that his group initially set for the first 3 miles and then finish strong over the last two, which was the goal of the race. Then we had our second meet this past weekend at Lehigh, the Paul Short Run, the biggest meet on the East Coast. It's pretty cool. A lot of Division I teams flying in from the West Coast, and it's a carnival of cross country. There's races going from 9:30 in the morning, which was the men's open race. We had 2 men in that field, all the way until 5 o'clock in the afternoon with the high school races. And we were there most of the day because we were in that first race in the open race, and then the championship races for Division III are the last college races of the day in the early afternoon. Our women got to race 6K for the first time there, and we thought it went pretty well. They definitely took a step forward from the first meet, showed some improvement. A lot of them came through the 5K mark during the race faster than they had run at Lebanon Valley College, so that's a very direct comparison. And they definitely placed better than they had at the previous meet. And we saw a lot of teams from our region and from some other neighboring regions. So it was just great to get a taste of competition, and looking forward to building on that this weekend at DeSales.
You mentioned seeing all of those other teams, especially at the Paul Short Run. Let's go to your squads for just a second specifically. How in cross country only, how do you measure success? And I think a lot of people would assume it's based on time, no?
Yeah, it's pretty complicated. It's a lot more difficult to measure than track, and even outdoor track, this is a factor too, but the variables you have to take into consideration are the weather conditions. Lehigh this past meet was beautiful weather, nice and cool, no wind, and not humid. So those are all things we take into account, but then also the terrain. What's the footing like? Is it muddy? Is the ground firm? How long is the grass? How hilly is the course? DeSales is a hilly course, so it's going to be significantly slower in terms of the times than Lehigh. But the main thing we look for in cross country is a true team sport. We care about place more than time, and that's something that as a coach I have to continually go back to with the athletes, because they want to set personal bests at the 8K and the 6K, but that's not always in the cards, right? You can't control the conditions on a given day. You can control how you execute your race plan and how you adapt to the circumstances that you find yourself in. And that's what we look at the most is, are you executing the race plan we've set out? Are you running even to negative splits if that applies? Sometimes that might not apply, right? On a course where the third mile at Lehigh in the women's 6K was the hardest of the 3.73. It had 3 hills in it. And we knew going in, okay, you can't be too time focused in terms of trying to run the same per mile pace each mile. The third mile is going to be slower. We know that going in. We want to make sure that we stay nice and smooth and efficient over the first half of the race so that we're able to attack those hills and then still have something left in the tank to kick in the final 1,200 meters. And I thought our women did a really nice job of that.
With all that said, and it seems to evolve race to race, course by course, weather by weather, and obviously I assume you want to be putting in your best towards the end of the season. It's a build up towards the conference and NCAA championships, fingers crossed, and all of those things. What are your goals for this year's cross-country teams?
Yeah, I think you make a nice point there that I think one of the silver linings of not having raced very much this year so far is that in cross country you only have so many big efforts that you can summon in a given season. So we've gotten some nice training in, and our teams are both improving week to week, and they're in a good place right now, and they're going to continue to improve over the next month for the championship meets that we really are pointing towards. And that's another thing that we have to emphasize is patience, right? You might not be racing exactly how you want to be early in the season or even mid-season, but you've got to keep your eyes on the prize, right? We're still lifting in the strength and conditioning room. We're not lowering the volume yet. The intensity is high. Those things will taper towards the end of the season, and then we expect to see significant improvements. In terms of goals, the number one goals for our team, this is the first time they've raced in 2 years, is to have fun. And we're trying to keep that first and at the forefront. It was tough. Last year, we didn't have a season. Some other teams got to practice. We did not. We had a few individuals come back for an outdoor track season. But really, we only had, from the cross-country team, only 5 people. And only 4 of them have returned. 1 of them graduated. So only 4 got to participate last year. So this is a very new group. And if we stay focused on having fun on a daily basis, the times and the places are going to come along with that. We want to improve. This is only our second MAC cross-country championship. We didn't place as well as we would have liked to back in 2019. And so we want to show that we've made strides, we've improved. And so I think in terms of outcome goals, which we try to stay away from, I think both of our teams would like to improve on their placings from 2019.
Certainly something to look forward to as the season continues. The men's and the women's cross-country teams. He is the head coach of both of those programs, Lance Harden, and I'm Drew Casey, as you're tuned into the 3rd episode of the Stevens Athletics Coach's Corner. Coach, you talked about a couple of individuals, and one of them was Liam Concannon, who was your top finisher in the men's first meet of the season. Sophomore out of St. Peter's Prep, so very familiar with this area. What did you see from him, and what have you seen from some of the other guys in the meet and in some of the recent trainings?
So Liam was one of the 4 that I mentioned that was able to participate in outdoor track last year, and that was a great season for him. He improved every single race. He had a nice 5K PR, I believe a 15:47 by the end of the year. And I want to say he had run 16:08 on a cross-country course in high school. So that was something he felt really good about, that he could build off of. He trained decently well this summer back home in Cranford, New Jersey, and he's just continued to build off of that and adapt to our training system. He's responding really well. He got to race a couple 10Ks on the track last spring too, so that's pretty close in distance to the 8K, and he's definitely an aerobic beast, and he's really handling the training well, and he's working together well with his teammates too. So almost every day in practice, he's running with Matt Halverson and Ronnie Milau, and occasionally Jake Ulmer. The 4 of them have been our front group in training, and they work together well in that first race. Matt and Jake were with Liam every step of the way for the first 3 miles. and then Liam was able to bring it home really strong over the final two. So I expect him to continue to improve and be a key contributor for us.
On the women's side, it's been Erin Michelli who's been your top finisher in each of the first two meets for the women's team. What have you seen from her and some of the other student athletes on the team?
Yeah, Erin's been great. She had what I would argue was her finest cross-country race as a Stevens athlete at Lehigh. It wasn't quite a PR. It was within 10 seconds of it. But given where she's coming from, she had to have surgery during the interim, the pandemic, and she's recovered really well from that. She's back to consistent training, and she's in a great place. She's also demonstrated some really strong leadership, which we really appreciate and need because as we mentioned before, we've got a fairly young team, and she's not doing it alone. Same thing. I mean, she's pushed in practice on a daily basis by different people on different days. But Trinity Lundimo is typically up there, up front, working with her. But then on other days, our sophomore class has really made an impact, and that's Gabby Tork, Fiona Furyk, and Jacqueline Lulai. And the three of them on any given day can work out with Erin. And so we've got a really strong pack, and that's something that we preach and work on. And I think Erin was really excited at Lehigh, going back to how we evaluate ourselves on her execution of the race plan. And it was complete race. There was not a single stage where she lost focus. She was passing people the entirety of the race. And those are the ones where afterwards you can look in the mirror and know I gave it everything I had and did my best.
It's still so early in the season, but as Yogi Berra famously said, it's getting late early. Before you know it, it will be conference championships. It'll be those big-time races. Before that, of course, you do have some other competitions and meets, including this weekend, the DeSales Invite. What are you looking for from both squads as you prepare for that?
Yeah, so that's the site of our MAC championships this year. We've never been to this course before, so it's really important for us to check it out. It's an old-school cross-country course. It's in the middle of their campus. It starts in the middle of the campus, goes out one direction, runs around a cornfield, comes back through the campus to the other side where the athletic facilities are, and the finish line is in a half a mile away from the start line. You don't see courses like that very often anymore, and they've been running big-time meets there for a while. Our regional meet will actually be there next year, so we're gonna get really familiar with the course. The main thing I want to see is our athletes gaining familiarity with the course. It's a unique course. There's a lot of hills on it. It's not spectator friendly. There's going to be some sections of it that are remote and quiet, and the athletes are going to have to rely on some internal motivation in those sections. And I want them to be paying attention and observant so that they know when we come back for the MAC championships exactly where the key features are, where they want to make their moves. And I think the other thing we'd like to see is just continued improvement of the race strategy and execution. And so that might not be personal best, right? Like we said before, it's going to be a slower course. But we want to see people measuring their effort well, finishing as strong as they start. And it's going to be a really great meet. There's like 25 teams coming. Most of the teams from our conference will be there. So we'll get a good sense of where we stack up just in terms of place.
He is Lance Harden, the head coach of both men's and women's cross country here at Stevens. I'm Drew Casey as we continue episode number 3 of the Stevens Athletics Coaches Corner as we're recording prior to the second weekend in October. Coach, in general, I think a lot of people might have questions about cross country outside of competition day. Maybe a common image from the movie Forrest Gump. You just start running. Is that how you practice? How does a training session look in the lead up to a week of a meet? I assume it's not quite like that.
Our sport is all about recovery. So it's the most impactful activity you can do in terms of damage to the muscle cells. And we have to be very careful about taking care of ourselves. So sleep is paramount. In general, we have 2 recovery days of easier paced running in between our harder workout sessions. The most important day of the week is the long run. So for our team, that can be anywhere from 10 to 16 miles. That's something we drive out for on Sundays to some really nice parks in the area. And yeah, it's also the workouts themselves. We're working different energy systems. So our most recent workout this past Tuesday morning at a bird sanctuary in Secaucus, we were focused on the VO2 max system. On other days, we're working on lactate threshold. And we blend together all the different energy systems throughout the year. There's periodization of training, so depending on the time of year, the focal points will change. But yeah, it's a high volume sport because both the 6K and the 8K are aerobic race distances. So we've got to maintain a lot of mileage overall. We also do a fair amount of cross training, so to limit the amount of impact on the legs. So we're in the pool, we're on the bike, we're on the elliptical machine, and we're working hard, but we're trying to work smart too.
Somebody else who's working hard is clearly you. You're the head coach of 6 programs, really, when you think about it: men's, women's cross country, indoor track and field, outdoor track and field. Of course, there's a lot of carryover, but a lot of differences too. Let's stick with cross country. And when you think of a head coach, you think of somebody who's going to be on the sidelines, right there with everybody. Ask the officials nicely why a certain call was made. But in cross country, is that done? Do you follow? Do you run with the team? Are you bouncing back and forth? How does that work on a race day for you?
Yeah, race day, it definitely helps to be in good shape because in order to see the athletes as often as possible, you've got to run around the course and I try to get to the quieter spots of the course where they can actually hear me, away from the other spectators like parents, where they're gonna need to hear that voice. And yeah, it's a lot of running. I mean, especially when you have open races on top of championship races, you might be sprinting around for 4 different races. It's kind of like Dale Jordan. I know you talked to him earlier, and the tracking devices they use. Sometimes I'm running 10 miles on a meet day just to get to all the spots. But I want to give a shout out to our assistant coach, John Kolobab. He's been a huge help. He's been at all the meets this year, and the athletes really appreciate his presence. We also have 3 volunteer assistants that all ran competitively at the Division I level. They've got great expertise. They've been at a lot of practices this year. So the more people we can have, all hands on deck, the better. It's tough. You know, another facet of our sport that's unique is when one team is racing, the other team is warming up. And I can only be in one place at a time. So the student athletes have to take a lot of ownership, and they have to be in charge of when do we need to be doing each step of the preparation for a race. And that's true in the off season too. So I think it's something that they've really improved upon, and they're continuing to develop as we go.
It's the Stevens Athletics Coaches Corner for just a couple more minutes with the head coach of the men's and women's cross country programs, Lance Harden, and I'm your host, Drew Casey. Coach, the last question before one final wrap-up that I have is recruiting, and in cross country. A lot of sports, and we talked with Coach Spencer Blates with field hockey last week, and she said social media video has really become big for her and her staff during the pandemic, just because it was one of the only sources to get the type of materials from prospective recruits that you're looking for. What does the recruiting process look like for cross country? I assume you're not getting videos of people just running down the street, right?
Yeah, no, and the pandemic has certainly changed things. So typically most cross country runners also run track and field times are a much better indicator because it's, you know what you're getting, right? A cross country course might not be measured correctly. You don't know all the factors that go into it. We look at cross country times, and there are certain courses that we know, like Homedale, where the New Jersey State meet is held. We know what a good time there looks like. But high school athletes haven't had the chance to compete very much either. So we've had to be much more lenient in terms of our own recruiting standards and of time evaluation, and just get to know recruits, right? Talk to them about what they've done during the pandemic. A lot of them have done time trials or road races. So there are other data points that we can get to evaluate them. But also, you know, what were they doing? Were they running during the pandemic just because they loved the sport, even though they didn't have meets on the calendar? That's a good sign of the type of recruit we want to bring into the program, is someone who's in it for the long haul and does it because it's the most exciting thing to them that day.
Last question. Why should a Stevens fan, like somebody tuned here on social media or on YouTube, a spectator, anyone like that, follow your team online with the great coverage that the Stevens staff of Charles O'Brien and Doug Waters and others put together? Why should they follow the teams or maybe even come out to a meet as a spectator for this season's men's and women's cross country teams?
We certainly appreciate all the support. We're one of the few teams on campus that doesn't have any home contests, so we're always on the road. And it's a sport where having people in your corner cheering for you goes a long way. It makes a big difference. There's a lot of hard work that's going on behind the scenes, a lot of hours put in year-round. So, yeah, I think we try to do our best to support other teams, and especially at the home contests on campus. It'd be great to have folks come out, and it's a fun sport too. Cross country, you're gonna get your own workout in watching the race, so you can cross that off the list too. And I think there's something for everyone there.
Head coach Lance Harden of Stevens Cross Country, men's and women's side. Coach, that was very informative for me and our audience as well. I just have to get in a little bit better shape before I come out to a meet because I'm not sure I'd be able to keep up. Thanks for the time.
Great to meet you.
So that's another episode of the Stevens Athletics Coach's Corner with the cross country head coach Lance Harden. And I'm Drew Casey. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you again next week.